So committing to...
There's a tendency, even in Milton's, in Milton's Paradise Lost, there's been two readings of that forever. And one of them is that Milton's Satan is an anti-hero of the most profound sort, really the embodiment of evil.
So
you meet Satan at the crossroads, there's no necessity that you're going to recover from that. Like, these are realities. In fact, they're the deepest realities. That's why people break apart in a situation like that. They come across something that's so dark that they just can't function. Well, the first thing to become aware of is that's actually how the world is constituted. It's constituted as a landscape of good and evil. We're very bad at teaching people that. We portray it in our movies, always, in action-adventure stories, always a landscape of good and evil, a mythological quest, the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, the Marvel Universe. Those are all landscapes of good and evil. What we don't understand is that is the landscape. Now, partly we don't understand it because we're in pumpkin shells, right? It's like normal middle-class existence. There's not much good in it in the extreme sense. There's not much evil in it in the extreme sense. It's all middle of the road. But that's not life. And if you're in that pumpkin shell and you're naive and then you encounter life, it's like, well, good luck to you. Because you
commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. Well, there's this bunch of questions there that people have been puzzling over for a long time. God, he's a tricky character in the story of Adam and Eve. It's like, well, okay, if we can't eat the damn thing, well, why put it in the garden to begin with? That would be one question. And you made us, and then you told us not to eat this, knowing perfectly well that the first thing we were going to do is eat it, because people are of exactly that type, which is that if you say to them with their insatiable curiosity, this is all fine and nice, but over here is something you should never look at, and then you leave the room, it's like everybody's over there trying to figure out what the hell that thing is instantly, right? Because we're curious creatures. And so you have to wonder exactly what God was up to here. And there's Gnostic speculation that the original God, this one, was not really a very good God. He was kind of an unconscious evil God, and that he wanted his creation to be unconscious, and so forbade them from developing consciousness, and that it was a higher God who, and maybe in the form of the serpent, who tempted human beings towards consciousness. And that idea got scrubbed out of classic Christianity pretty early, although there's something that's interesting about it, and there are remnants of it in different forms that stayed inside the story. Like the idea that the fall was a terrible tragedy, but on the other hand, it was the precondition for the greatest event in history, which was the birth of Christ and the redemption of mankind. And so it's complicated, let's put it that way. God only knows what God was up to, but this is a good example of that ambivalence. And to me, again, that it's an indication of the sophistication of the people who put these stories together. And I also consider this somewhat miraculous, because if you were just a simple propagandist of sorts, you wouldn't leave this sort of complexity in the text. You just get rid of that, because if you're a propagandist, everything is supposed to make sense along the ideological plane, and here God's supposed to be good. It's like, well, we better get there to that line, because something's up with it, and it isn't obvious what it is, but that isn't what people did. And to me, that indicates that they were doing two things, is they were trying not to be too careless with the traditions that they were handed. They were touching them at their peril. They were very careful with them, and also that they were actually trying to understand what was going on, because why otherwise keep this? Why not just simplify?
When someone says, do you believe in God? There's three parts to that question. The first question is, who is the you to which they are referring? The second is, what do you mean by belief? The third is, what do you mean by God?
And people might say, well, I don't believe in God. It's like, well, it depends on what you mean. The Greeks thought we were the playthings of the gods because we serve lust, we serve thirst, we serve hunger, we serve rage, and those things all transcend us. So that's why they were gods. Rage, that's the war god. Well, why is it a god? Well, it exists forever. It exists in all people. It takes them over and directs their behavior. It's a god. Well, you can quibble about the details. No, it's not a god. Okay, fine. It's a psychological force.
Do you believe that Jesus rose again from the dead? Literally. A historical human being that existed
in a body.
In a body.
In a body. And,
Yeah.
and it was a physical body, and that it was on Earth.
Yes. That it was on Earth, and that was literally, they came back to life after death.
I would say that at the moment I'm agnostic about that issue. You got the scientific atheists on one end and you got the religious fundamentalists on the other, and what they both agree on, whether they like it or not, is that there's so much power in the scientific method that it's difficult to dispute the validity of scientific facts. And they seem to exist in contradiction to the older archaic stories if you also accept them as fact-based accounts. So what do we do about that? Superstitious science, second-rate, barbaric, archaic forms of science, you just dispense with them, they're nothing but trouble. And if you're on the fundamentalist side, you say, well, we'll try to shoehorn science into this framework, and really that doesn't work very well. It doesn't work very well with the claims of evolution, for example. In fact, it works very badly, and that's a problem, because evolutionary theory is like, it's a killer theory, and it's really, really hard. And like, it's not a complete theory, and there's lots of things we don't know about evolution, but you know, trying to hand wave that away, that's not going to work without dispensing with most of biology.
So people often ask me, do you believe in God? Which I don't like that question. It's an attempt to box me in a sense. And the reason that it's an attempt to box me in is because the question is asked so that I can be firmly placed on one side of a binary argument. Did his body resurrect? I don't know.
I'm a clinical psychologist. I have an active clinical practice. I'm a business consultant. I do executive coaching mostly for senior partners at big law firms. I worked on the UN Secretary General's High Panel for Sustainability, the report that was delivered in, I believe, 2013, and rewrote the underlying narrative to strip out most of the ideological claptrap.
Peterson, a symbol for Western debate here. And he exists. Now, here's the point, you know that there are central doctrines to Christianity, like the crucifixion, the ascension, the resurrection, and all the above, right? These are doctrines. How do we look at these doctrines? Because the reason why I'm asking you, I think you are qualified, or at least you have some, because you did mention in your lectures that you were taking the approach of the Alexandrian school, which is like Origin of Alexander and his Jewish teacher Philo and all these kinds of people who take what you call the spiritualizing text. They spiritualize the text. They were known, the Alexandrian school was known for spiritualizing the text. And they were aberrational in that sense, and that's why they were one of the reasons why they were seen as heretics by all, I think, all the churches. The Eastern.
I think just Origin, but the Origin said some things which are heretical, but he has massive influence on church fathers that are respected. But to your point, let's say the notion.
Hey guys, welcome to Forward. This is apparently an ad.
What do you mean happening? So let me just unpack that a little bit. So I did a lecture last night at the Apollo on the story of Cain and Abel. Yes. And one of the things that I proposed was that not only did that story happen, but it's always happening. Yes. It always happened. It's happening right now, and it's always going to happen into the future. And so I would say to some degree, the mere reduction of these profound stories to a historical reality is an underestimate of their truth, because they're a strange kind of truth, because they're the truth that always happened and is happening now and always will happen. So if the Cain and Abel story, for example, you have a story of the eternal battle between something like the spirit of joyful, and so then when I look at a story like Cain and Abel, I think, well, the question, did that happen, begs the question, what do you mean by happen? Because when you are dealing with fundamental realities and you pose a question, you have to understand that the reality of the concepts of your question, when you're digging that deep, are just as questionable as what you're questioning. So people say to me, what do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And you say as the questioner, well, we already know what all those things mean, except belief in God. And I think, no, if we're going to get down to the fundamental brass tacks, we don't really know what any of those things mean.
It made. And he said unto the woman, yea, hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. I like this. This is, I can't remember who did the etching now. Who is it? Doré, yeah, Doré, exactly. Doré did etchings for Paradise Lost that are absolutely remarkable. And this is Satan, and this is the snake here. And of course, in the Genesis story, Satan is weirdly associated with the snake. And I'll tell you, that's a tough one to sort out, because in the story of Adam and Eve, there's no indication whatsoever that the serpent who tempts Eve is also Satan, the author of all evil. And how in the world those two stories got tangled together, well, I think I figured that out. And I'm going to tell you that tonight, but it took a very long time to figure it out. And it's so bloody brilliant. I just can't believe that people figured it out. It's so unbelievably, spectacularly brilliant. And that's an intimation of that idea, right? That there's a kinship between these two things. So anyways, the serpent's more subtle than any beast of the field. Subtle's an interesting word. This is from the Oxford English Dictionary. So, because we'll amplify the word a bit, this is what you do in Jungian dream interpretation, for example, is to kind of look at the connotations of the concepts that are associated with the dream. Subtle, of a person or animal in action, behavior, crafty, cunning, sly, treacherous. So it's something that sort of sneaks along, right? It's not something that you really pick up on that easily. Of a look or glance, sly, furtive, surreptitious. Of a person, skillful, expert, clever. Of a work of art, mechanical device, cleverly made or designed, ingenious. Well, I think that's all fairly, all those terms so far are fairly well attributed to snakes. I mean, they are very cool things, and they are very well designed, and they're quite remarkable, and they're also very subtle. On the nature of or involving careful discrimination of fine points, difficult to understand and abstruse. Of a person, the mind, or intellectual activity, characterized by wisdom or perceptiveness, discriminating, discerning, and shrewd. That's interesting because Milton's Satan is also the intellect. And you see that very often. It's so often the bad guy's an evil scientist, right? And there's something about, and you see the same thing in The Lion King with Scar. I mean, Scar's an intellect, an arrogant, deceitful intellect. There's nothing stupid about Scar. He's not wise, but he's the evil voice that's always whispering in the king's ear, and that's associated with the pride of the intellect. And the Catholics had warned humanity about the pride of the intellect for centuries. That's partly what produced somewhat of the schism between Catholicism and science, although that's much overstated if you look at the historical record. The idea was that the intellect has its own particular, it's a remarkable faculty. Let's say it's the highest angel in God's heavenly kingdom. That's the way that Milton portrayed it. But it's also the thing that can go most terribly wrong, because the intellect can become arrogant about its own existence and accomplishments, and it can fall in love with its own products. And that's what happens when you're ideologically possessed, because you end up with a dogma, like say a human constructed dogma in Solzhenitsyn's words, that possesses you completely, of which you believe is 100% right? So it eradicates the necessity for anything transcendent. And so that's the subtle element of the intellect that's associated symbolically with the snake in the Garden of Paradise. Of a feeling, sense, sensation, acute and keen, involving distinctions that are fine or delicate, especially to such an extent as to be difficult to discern or analyze, also almost imperceptible and elusive, having little thickness or breadth, thin, fine, subtle matter, now historical, rarefied matter, barely there at all. And the woman said unto the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, ye shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said to the woman, ye shall not surely die. For God doth know in the day that you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Sneaky, subtle. It's a nice story, eh? The first thing is, the instant implication is, well, you can't trust God. So that's pretty sneaky. And the next is, well, he's trying to pull a fast one on you. And the next one is, well, he's trying to do that because he's jealous, and he doesn't want you to know things that he knows, because that wouldn't be so good. And he's lying to you anyways, because you're not going to die. And if you eat it, contrary to what you've been informed, then all that's going to happen is your eyes will be open and you'll be like gods, knowing good and evil. Well, that sounds pretty damn good. So, Eve, what does she know? It's no wonder she's susceptible to such blandishments. And it's quite interesting too, because Adam and Eve, God tells Adam and Eve not to eat the damn fruit, but they never promise not to, right? So they haven't promised, they've just been told to. And well, should they be obedient? Well, how obedient do you want your children to be? You want them to be obedient enough so they don't get hurt, but disobedient enough so that they go out in the world and do something courageous, and they break some rules, and they learn some things. And so, it's a very paradoxical story. Anyways, the serpent wins this round, man. And so Eve pays attention to the snake.
Stick it in deeper.
So again, we have the same set of images, right? We have Adam and we have Eve. We have this tree and we have this strange serpent. That's a dragon-like form. They're a sphinx-like form that's associated with the tree. The snake's eternally associated with the tree. Well, the snake wasn't eternally associated with the tree. We spent, God only knows how many tens of millions of years as tree-dwelling primates. And the primary, or one of our primary predators, we had 3 primary predators: snakes, birds, cats. And so the snake has been associated with the tree for a very, very long time.
Well, there's a tendency, even in Milton's in Milton's Paradise Lost, there's been 2 readings of that forever, and one of them is that Milton's Satan is an anti-hero of the most profound sort, really the embodiment of evil, and the other reading is that Milton's Satan is a disguised hero and the eternal, what would you say, the eternal rebel against established order and someone to emulate in consequence, and that Milton somehow knew that and was coding that, not precisely secretly, but subtly. Well, there's a tendency, even in Milton's in Milton's Paradise Lost, there's been 2 readings of that forever. And
the best place to find Satan, let's say, is within. If you think the true enemy is in someone else's heart, then you haven't thought nearly long enough about the darkness within, and you have therefore fallen prey to the most subtle temptation of the ancient demonic spirit.
the best could imagine someone comparatively harmless who toys with ritualistic satanic activities in a sort of dramatic manner. And then you could imagine someone who tortures nuns and priests and burns down churches, but forgoes any technical affiliation with Satan. I would say that the latter is the Satanist in a much deeper sense than the former.
Jordan Peterson, in fact, I think this was like a day ago.
Pastor Richard Wurmbrand, who wrote the famous book Tortured for Christ, and was tortured for Christ in Romanian prisons by communist captors who were shouting, "I am the devil," while they were torturing him. He did a book called Marx and Satan. He's convinced that Marx was a Satanist and did some things ritualistically that it might have even been satanic. But I can't say that. I can't endorse that.
But you see evidence of that in his play.
I've never seen,
in terms of at least his fantasies.
That's right. That's right. In fact, Payne even goes so far as to say, Vladimir Lenin, right? There's a statement from Lenin which said, when I was a teen, I broke from all religion. I took the cross from my neck and I threw it in the rubbish bin. And Payne has a quote where, not Payne, Richard Wurmbrand, where I think he believes that Lenin even stomped on it. He says, well, that's a satanic ritual. I don't know. I don't know that it is or not. But there's another case of Lenin who at least did the work of the devil. I mean, Lenin had, according to Robert Conquest, W.H. Chamberlain, the first historian of the Russian Revolution, 500,000 people were killed from 1917 to 1923 under Lenin, not even including the Russian Civil War. If that's not the devil's work, I don't know what the hell is, right? But I think what Payne said in the latter quote, the devil's view of the world, the devil's malignity, and at the very least, this identification with kind of devilish-like destruction, right? Tearing everything down, rebelling against the world, everything that exists deserves to perish. That at least, and then the ideology that he created that just happened to be responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people in the 20th century, you know, more than World War I and World War II combined. So that ideology was pretty hellacious.
To say the least. Okay, so, and I think it's very naive not to assume that the events that we described in Marx's life are not connected. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Correct. Ban religion.
Right. Atheists.
That's
They're
right.
not exactly atheists because they're trying to stomp something out.
That's right. It's not
a neutrality.
That's right. It's not a neutrality toward religion. It's not irreligion. It's not separation of church and state. It is militant, aggressive atheism. Trotsky and Lenin create the League of the Militant Godless.
Right.
They ban religion. They have the Moscow church trials. They blow up churches. They jail priests, right? The Solzhenitsyn writes in the Gulag Archipelago, they put nuns in special sections of the Gulag with prostitutes.
Yes, right.
Deem them whores to Christ.
Absolutely.
Lenin said, all worship of a divinity is a necrophilia. There is nothing more abominable than religion. So they don't just try to stop religion. They want Pol Pot, the Buddhist monks in Cambodia, to renounce their vows, to marry. It's not enough for them to be quiet. And so
I
after
don't
4 years,
know how you can separate a militantly anti-religious atheism from especially, say, within a Christian context, from something approximating satanic ideology. Because I don't see how conceptually that separation is possible. It's one thing to be atheist in the manner that leaves people to go to hell in a handbasket in their own way, but to be actually an enemy of the religious enterprise, that's a whole different thing.
It is.
So, and that obviously Marx and the communists were obviously that, clearly, obviously.
And Satan might say, I don't care if you believe in me or not, you're doing my work, man. I mean, you're shutting down churches, blowing up churches.
That also touches on the issue of what it means to believe, right? And I mean, you could imagine someone comparatively harmless who toys with ritualistic satanic activities in a sort of dramatic manner. And then you could imagine someone who tortures nuns and priests and burns down churches, but forgoes any technical affiliation with Satan. I would say that the latter is the Satanist in a much deeper sense than the former. Not that what the former is doing is excusable.
Or at least satanic.
Yes, right. But to do what the communists did to the religious enterprise is evidence of something far more militant than a mere atheist.